This is the very first episode of the Midwest Gaming Classic podcast. I'm your host, panel director of the Midwest Gaming Classic, Jason Gares. And this afternoon, for the first episode, I am rewinding time, so to speak, and going back to the year of 2021, where I had interviewed Howard Scott Warshaw. And some of you may know this name, and some of you may not know this name. He was the man who was blamed for the single takedown of the video game industry by designing the game E.T. Now, designing a game isn't going to get a whole industry, so to speak, taken down in one fell swoop. It was many factors, but for some reason, the game E.T. and basically was the scapegoat for a failing industry at the time. And basically what it came down to was Howard Scott Warshaw and his design of E.T. Became the scapegoat because of the timing of when the video game came out and the crash, the first video game crash, which happened in the early 1980s. I want to say 82, 83. I could be wrong on that. I was a little boy at the time. I think about like 10, 11 years old. So, of course, I wasn't paying attention to it too much. But growing up, I found out that, E.T., the game, and Howard Scott Warshaw were blamed for the video game crash of the early 1980s. So I had interviewed him a couple years ago in 2021, and I thought that it would probably be a good idea to show the interview again because it's very insightful, and it did go on for about 2 hours, so be prepared for a 2-hour interview. And I don't know if I had taken advantage of Howard Scott Warshaw, but he seemed to go along with it quite well. And near the end, you said, "Hey, I gotta get going. I don't want this to turn into a 3 or 4 hour talk." So. And it was going on 2 hours. So, but it's very insightful. I brought some things up from the past, some interviews, showed some videos, and talked about his new book and a DVD that he had out for a little bit of time before the book that he had published. So I do have the book and I have the DVD, both of which are signed by him, and it was an honor to really interview him. I never thought, I mentioned this in my interview with him, I never thought at 10 years old or 11, whatever, that I would interview the guy who was blamed for taking down the whole video game industry because of one bad game. And really what it was a flood of bad games. There was no measure of what a good game was back then, unlike what Nintendo does with the seal of approval, though that can be contested as well. So, enough of me talking. Why don't we get into the video?
Only from Atari. Made especially for systems from Atari. The video game that lets you help E.T. get home. Just in time for Christmas. Happy holidays.
Thank you very much for showing up to the Wednesday night edition of TV MGC. I'm your host, panel director of the Midwest Gaming Classic, Jason Gares, and tonight we have a very special guest joining us. He is the author of Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry book, the Once Upon Atari DVD, and one of the greatest games ever made, Yars Revenge. Let me introduce to you the one, the only Howard Scott Warshaw. Let me get change over to the different screen here. And there we go. There is Howard Scott Warshaw. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Howard.
Hey, Jason, how you doing? Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Hey, it is my pleasure, and it's definitely a very exciting moment for me. I would have never thought when I was 7 or 8 years old playing this game that I would be talking to the man who designed the game that I enjoyed playing. Thank you very much for all the memories that you had given me as a child, and I just can't believe that I'm talking to you right now.
Well, believe it, because it's actually happening.
Boom. Wow. So what we're going to do today now, as a matter of fact, I'm going to kind of rewind here. What did you think about seeing that ET commercial pushing the product that you made in 5 short weeks? What kind of memories come back to you?
Enough memories to fill an entire book.
Which book would that be, Howard? Can you show us?
That would be Once Upon Atari,
Right,
How
right.
I Made History by Destroying an Industry. It's all right here.
Yeah, right in that book. That's right. And I'm 3/4 of the way through it, and I actually enjoy it more than the DVD. I do like the DVD is a good supplemental material for the book. So I mean, I really highly suggest getting both of them because there's kind of a different perspective. You have the personal perspective from you, and then you get more of your colleagues that you had interviewed for the DVD and their ideas and their triumphs and tribulations, so to speak, of what they went through at Atari. And talking about the DVD, I had seen through an interview that I'm going to be showing tonight that you did back in the late 90s that you got into video production. Can you tell us a little bit more about how and why you got into video production?
I got into video production because I love media. I mean, I just love media. I've always loved media. And my phone keeps collapsing. I can't manage my media, but I certainly love it. And, how I got into video production was I was working away at a company in industrial robotics, and my cube mate said he knows of my love for TV and film and production. There's a TV video production course at a local college. It's like an 18-month curriculum, and he gave me the listing for it. And I looked and I thought, that would be fun. And so what I did was I called up and registered, and I did their 18-month program in 9 months, and I got my first video aired on PBS. And it was thrilling. It was really exciting. And I realized I really wanted to become a video producer because I wanted to tell the Atari story. I'd seen so much media about Atari. In the 80s and 90s, a lot of people produced media about Atari and what was going on at Atari and what happened while we were making the games. And the thing that really killed me was it was so inaccurate. The people who were writing it and producing it really didn't know anything about what was really going on at Atari. And the things they were saying weren't that compelling. And the thing that really shocked me was it was really an interesting story. The kind of wild stuff that was going on at Atari was not being shared because they weren't talking to any of the people who really knew it, or the people who they were talking to weren't sharing it. So I thought what I wanted to do was put together a piece of media that was exclusively done by people who were there. the people who were actually making games and in the weeds there at Atari, both literally and figuratively, and to really share what was going on at Atari at the time, because it was an amazing experience. And I wanted to do it to sort of process it myself, to get my head clear about it, because Atari was an amazing head trip.
Yes, I had, well, reading your book, I kind of get that sense of the whole head trip thing in the way, Atari was ahead of its time, but also a product of its time. It was definitely in a time capsule and couldn't be done today by any standards, as the way things were run and the culture. There is sort of culture with like Microsoft and Google and Apple, but it's structured. There's more of a structure to it than by what I had seen with what you went through at Atari at the time. Do you believe that as well? That the way the structure was then at Atari is completely different with how big tech is now?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I think Atari really established a real good paradigm for big tech, a good way to operate, a way to understand that. See, one of the interesting things about working in especially in entertainment software production is that if you look at an org chart for a company, in most companies, at the bottom of the org chart are line workers, people who actually make the product, and they're the grunts who just stand on the line and put stuff together. And if you look at a software company, programmers are the grunts, right? They're the people who are at the bottom of the org chart, and that's it. But there's a classical way that higher level managers relate to people at the bottom of the org chart, which is principally by not relating to them. And that doesn't work very well with software people, because software people have a lot more going on than I think a lot of classical management is used to dealing with. And Nolan Bushnell really had a lot of insight about that. I think Nolan Bushnell really understood the idea that your line worker in terms of software production is a very different being than the typical line worker that you deal with, and doesn't fit into a classical management structure the way typical line workers do. And so he was able to really organize the company differently, be able to treat programmers in a way that enabled them to be more productive, and sort of disconnected them from some of the main corporate flow in a way that was pretty astute and pretty smart, especially and revolutionary for the time. And of course, one of the things I cover in the book extensively is the idea that, as Kazar and Warner came in, they did not understand this concept. And so they tried to retrofit a more classic corporate structure on top of what was working in terms of creative production for Atari, for entertainment production. And that was a collision that generated a lot of interesting byproducts, mostly in terms of tension, anxiety, conflict, and some amusement.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
yeah, yes, you did, and it all relevant to everything that I've read so far in your book, and you definitely go into detail more in your book for sure. And the next segment that I want to show you is going to be a blast from the past. It's not in HD quality or anything much like the commercial, but it's a bit of a younger you, and you're being interviewed, and you consider yourself a chef. So why don't we get to that segment, and hopefully you give us your feelings on it. So let me switch on over to that screen.
Please, give me the donuts, please. Come on. Please. It wasn't too bad. How am I doing, huh?
We didn't care about the kid.
Well, thanks. Thanks for being you. Yeah, I don't know too much about these video games, as you can see, and she can see there, too. I think I'd like them a whole lot better if we could combine them with network programming and, say, get a squadron of flying starships to blow up the Dukes of Hazzard. Now, to me, that's entertainment. Hi, I'm Bob Starlight on the lookout for American hot stuff, trends that are sweeping the country. Tonight, it's the new E.T., Raiders, and Sword Quest games. We're going to get a chance to meet the guy that invented these games and to show you how you can win. Ooh. This is video game heaven. Atari Incorporated, the granddaddy of the exploding tube. For most video warriors, life as they know it began here in 1975 with the invention of Pong, a game even I could understand. Since that blessed event, the video world has gotten more expensive and complicated. There were Space Invaders, Pac-Man, and now E.T.
Principally, I am a software chef.
A software chef.
Exactly.
To get the straight scoop on all of this, I personally visited with the inventor of both the new E.T. and Raiders games. His name, Howard Scott Warshaw. Howard is the one on the right.
Well, the object is to get E.T. home.
Before E.T. can get home, he must first evade the FBI, a scientist, and these foreboding wells.
Why don't you push your button? There you go. Now levitate out of
He
there.
looks like a tractor, doesn't he? When do we go to Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Okay, well, naturally, the object is to find the Ark. You've got snakes and raiders, you've got tsetse flies, you've got vicious spiders.
See, what you got is a game that takes a lot of time. We're talking days, weeks, months, careers, lifetimes. This is a serious video endeavor. But not as serious as this. Sword Quest, the quest for the sword. Sounds simple, but this one requires 4 separate cartridges. So complex that Atari is actually holding a Sword Quest tournament where the grand prize is a $50,000 jeweled sword. Something we all have use for. Yeah, go ahead. Play these wimpy little games. Wait till the new E.T. comes out. I got a head start.
And well, there you go. There's a bit of an old segment. I kind of dug deep to try to find something a little bit different. I don't know if you've seen that one or not, or how long it's been since you've seen that one. What are your thoughts on that segment? Do you remember doing that?
I don't actually remember doing it per se. I have seen that segment before, and it's pretty amusing to me. But yep, that's me. And what's hard is sometimes it's tricky to explain something to someone who has no idea what it is you're talking about. And I think that was the experience with that guy. He was very upfront about the fact that he could basically understand Pong, and that was about it. And I don't think he was lying or misrepresenting anything in that case. But and the software chef thing, I tried to come up with a metaphor that would make some sense, because it was like that. Because programming a video game is a very, it's both a technical and an artistic endeavor. And that's the beauty of it, right, is that it mixes both. See, there are people who like art and like artistic approaches, and that's what they like to do and be very intuitive and pour things in and mix them up and magic comes out. And that's exciting. And there are people who like to totally nerd out and just get knee deep in really ugly tech and have to know every nook and cranny of a system and love the minutia of it. And then every once in a while you get people who are both. And that's what you found at Atari. That was what was really interesting about the programmers at Atari, is that to succeed at Atari, you really had to be both. You had to be a hyper-intensive nerd to be able to produce anything on the machine. But you also had to have an artist in you. You had to have a sense of fun, to be goofy, to be a little off, to be capable of thinking of things in new directions, in new ways, in odd, your brain had to be a really focused and a little bent. And that's what we had. And I think I was that way. And I think there were a number of people there who were that way. And when people like that get together with other people like that, some very interesting stuff ensues. And that's why I had to make, Once Upon Atari. That's why I had to make the video. and ultimately write the book. I made the video first because I felt people needed to know the actuality of what went on there because it was just so cool.
Right.
So much really interesting, crazy, wacky stuff that went on. And a lot of people had always been asking me, well, what was it like there? What was it really like to work there? What was it really like to make games there? That was an exciting thing. But, you know, a lot of people are probably familiar with the Atari Game Over movie, where we did the dig looking for the E.T. carts in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Yes.
And Zach Penn, the guy who directed that movie, pretty cool guy. And we were talking at one point during the filming of that show, and he had watched Once Upon Atari, the DVD, a number of times as research for that movie. And he made an interesting observation to me. He said, the one thing that's really missing from the Once Upon Atari DVD is you. He goes, you're a big part of the Atari story, and you didn't really tell that part of the story. And he's right. I made the movie. I directed and produced, and I'm in it somewhat. I'm the host and the narrator. But I felt too self-conscious to put me in it too much. I'm a little bit in episode 4.
Right.
But I'm really not in it very much. And he said that was a big problem with it. And I thought, well, he's got a point. So, and for about 20 years, people have been saying, well, when are you going to write a book about Atari? When are you going to write about Atari? Because I've written columns and I've been writing for many years in magazines, and I've written 3 books before on a variety of topics. And I decided, he's right, and I want to tell this story. And I always thought I'm going to have to write, some kind of memoir or autobiographical piece at some point. So why not now? And so I sat down to write this book. And boy, this project took longer than I anticipated it would.
How long did it take you, if I may ask?
Well, I sat down to seriously start writing this book in 2016 and didn't finish it till late 2020.
Okay. Well,
So I spent about 2 years organizing, conceptualizing, and collecting notes and things like that. And then about 2 years of earnest writing. Of course, I was running a psychotherapy practice full time during that entire period, and a few other things went on.
right.
There was a whole pandemic thing happened.
Yeah, there's a pandemic going on.
I didn't really notice. I was too busy writing. So, and when you're busy at the computer and writing all the time, you're not really worried about going out and running around and doing things. So it actually was very simpatico with the whole pandemic thing. One thing a pandemic can do is make you much more productive unless you just binge out on TV all the time, which I also found time to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been able to go through a lot of albums that I wanted to listen to from certain groups and go through their whole discography. So that's been really cool. And I'm getting into pre-production for my own film, and I'm also helping MGC with their streaming. And of course, I work full time as a marketer, but and a graphic designer, and I've been doing that luckily from home. So that's been very nice.
Excellent.
Prior to this, I put out my own documentary film, and that took me 2 years to do as well, from pre-production to release. So I understand a book is much like a movie where you got to get all your information together, and you got to sit down, you got to be focused, and you got to write it and edit it and then get it out to the world. So anything good, in my opinion, takes time. So
well, that's true. And I was unwilling to not do something good. The thing about that, this is going to be a book. It's about, my life principally, but the majority of it is my time at Atari and how Atari influenced my life. But the thing is, like the ET project suffered because of a limited time frame. And the one thing I was really committed to while writing the book was to not make the same mistake twice. Right? I was, the ET game suffered from a lack of time. I was not going to cut the book about that short just to have that suffer also.
Right.
But it was still, I must say, even 4 years writing this book was less than the 7 years it essentially took to produce the Once Upon Atari DVD.
Right. Yeah. I mean, all projects take a different amount of time, and I've learned over the years not to rush things because we live in a society now where people want things yesterday or quickly. And if they don't get it from you, they'll find it from somewhere else. And I've learned not to take that personally. So I'd rather take my time and wait. And if it takes 10 years, it takes 10 years, but it's on me. Now, if somebody throws me some money, of course, and then wants to produce it and, all that kind of stuff, that's a little different. But
That's a very different story. Yeah, if somebody's going to pay you to produce something, that can definitely accelerate a schedule.
oh, yes.
It did for ET, that's for sure. I'll tell you, but no one was paying me. I was doing that entirely on my own dime. And so, but one of the things that really delayed the Once Upon Atari DVD project was that there were substantial periods of time where I wasn't doing anything with it. That was not a 7 years of dense work. That was because I was waiting for technology. There were several periods where I just stopped work on it because I knew what I needed to use wasn't available yet. So I had to wait. So, I mean, do you want to know the production
Sure.
of the DVD?
Yes, sure. That would be great.
Because it started off, I knew I wanted to make the story. And I knew all the people. So in 1996, I started contacting my old friends from Atari, the people I used to work with, and lining up interviews, and I set up questions, and I went out and I took all the money I had at the time and I bought a VX1000, a Sony VX1000. It was the first digital prosumer camera, and that was expensive. And I had taken that video production course, and I was all set to do this, and my producer friends who I knew, this is an interesting thing, because I became a video producer, and most people who were in video at the time knew nothing about technology, right? They just knew about video. That's how they came to video production. And so I went out and I spent a bunch of money and I got this camera. People were like, "What are you doing? Really? That's what you're going to do? There's plenty of good cameras you can get for a lot less money." I said, "I think this needs to be in digital." I said, first of all, because the subject matter that I'm doing, it would be a shame not to do an Atari story in digital. But they were all like, "Well, do you think digital's really going to catch on? Do you think it's going to go anywhere?" It's like I said, "Yeah, I really do. I really think that digital video is like here to stay, and it's going to completely wipe out all the other formats." Mm-hmm. And they all thought, "Well, we'll see, But of course it would. But I knew that because I knew Moore's law. I knew how digital production progresses in anything. And yeah, at the time, there were better looking formats in film and even in some video, in tape video. But it was just a matter of time before the digital video was going to overtake that and move forward. And so I invested in that, and that was a good idea. But I shot it in video, but I couldn't edit it in video yet. And that was painful. So I shot it all in video. And the first episode I did, which was episode 4, nod to the whole Star Wars franchise, I guess. It wasn't I just figured the first episode that I wanted to do was the one that talked specifically about what it was like to program on the VCS. Because I knew a lot of people wanted to know about that. So I knocked everything down to SVHS tape, edited it that way. And so there was one episode that I did, but it wasn't edited in digital. And then I thought, this sucks. I got to edit this in digital. I want to make a more sincere shot at the whole thing. So I waited a couple of years. So it was 96, and in 97, I produced the first tape, which was the one episode, which was episode 4. And then I waited a couple of years, and in 99, I could finally afford to get a digital editing system. It wasn't very high capacity, and I could only produce like segments at a time and then lay them out and then pick up another segment. And I was able to digitally produce episodes 1 and 2, and then I dumped those to tape. And then I sold episodes 1 and 2 on tape for a while.
Okay.
And that's like 99. And then I thought, this needs to be a DVD. I need to just get it all together and put them all together in a DVD. And I couldn't get a system that was DVD capable. It took me until 2003 until I could finally get together and get a system that was DVD capable. And so I didn't bother to make the third episode until I felt I was ready with a system that was completely capable and I could deliver all of them. And then I still had the digital source for everything. So I put them all together at that point and made the DVD. So I started in 96 and delivered the DVD in 2003. So that's the 7-year start to finish project.
Wow. That, it takes time, and there's progression there, obviously, with the technology, and that helped you obviously progress into what you had in your head to the final, to where you really wanted to be. And you can see the difference in quality, so to speak, as far as the filming is concerned. I can tell just by looking at it that the segments were different, and of course your hairstyle changed. so it's like,
yeah, I decided to show more scalp as time went on. That's for sure.
Yes. So with that said, the next segment that I want to show is from, I don't know if you remember doing this. This was an interview with Next Generation magazine back in the late 1990s. So I'm going to switch on over to that.
Let's see, I was a game engineer at Atari for a number of years, and I did E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Yars Revenge, my favorite. And it's been many years since Atari, and thankfully the statute of limitations has run out by now. So I felt now was a good time for me to actually start to tell the story of Atari. I always felt that the story of Atari was never really told. I saw media about Atari, but it's always kind of fluff pieces and market pieces, but nobody ever went inside Atari and told the true story of what went on at Atari. And nobody really knew what was going on inside Atari. And there was some wild stuff going on at Atari. And I just thought it was time to tell that story. And, I became a video producer recently, and I thought, here's a good piece. The real story, as far as I knew it, was that management had called up my boss and said, we need a game in 6 weeks. And George Kish, who was the director at the time, and he laughed. He laughed at them. He says, we can do a game maybe in 5 or 4 months. But you don't do a game in 6 weeks. And they said, well, we've got 6 weeks to do E.T. We need someone to do it. And I don't know who else they talked to, but they called me up and said, can you do it? And I said, yeah, if we reach the right deal, because I knew I could do a game in 6 weeks if I designed a game to be done in 6 weeks. So I did the game, and I set it up so the approval was contingent on Spielberg. It was up to Spielberg to approve the game, because I wanted to get Spielberg up to visit more times. And that was always fun. And I did the game, and I just worked like all the time. I lived in my office, or sometimes I had a system at my home. I had them put a system in my home so I could work there too. And just all the time for like 6 weeks, I worked on the game. And then the game went out, and it was an okay game. It was not the greatest game, but it was a pretty good game, I think, for working on it for 6 weeks. And we had a meeting in the department when they announced Howard's going to do E.T. in 6 weeks. And everybody's going, oh, and everybody started talking, oh, that's going to be a big royalty thing, and that's going to get a lot of hype and stuff like this, and people are mumbling. And so I just stood up and I said, anybody else who would like to do this game in 6 weeks, raise your hand. I said, I will let you do the game. I said, I don't have to do this game. I said, if you want to do this game, go ahead. Who would like to do E.T.? Nobody raised their hand. So I said, okay, I'll do E.T. And I just did it, and I just killed myself doing it. And so at first that was real exciting, I thought, and I was thinking, yeah, this is going to get some hype. This is going to pay off. And then it got out, and people were very disappointed with the game. People were very unhappy with the game. Although I will say that it was still a million seller. But they printed 4 million, and it only sold 1 million. And so they really took a bath to some extent on it. But also, the rights they negotiated, they paid $22 million for E.T. You can't pay that much for the rights to a video game. That's what you expect to make on the video game. So I don't know if they wanted to be a loss leader, which it certainly worked in that regard. But I did what I could for the game, and it came out, and people just jumped on it. Oh, what a crappy game. And I have a copy of New Media Magazine, okay, which I hate to say on a next-gen CD, but I have a copy from many years ago, and I have it. There's an article in it, and it's on page 27, and it goes, E.T., the game many cite as the sole reason for the destruction of the video game industry. And so around, and I put that up at my cube at work now. And everywhere I go around work, people go, oh, this is Howard. He's the guy who single-handedly toppled a billion-dollar industry. I say, yep, that's me.
All right. So, what what do you think about that? Looking back on that that interview with taking the, I don't know if it's more, I don't think you were taking the responsibility of anything, of course, because it wasn't your fault, but it was like, you know what, I'm going to just embrace this. And like, yep, I'm the guy who did that. So that's what I'm known for. Is that like, how over the years, how have you dealt with that stigma, so to speak, that, you and a game that you did in 5 weeks was, everybody thought over the years was the reason why there was the collapse?
Well, Jason, I got to tell you, you're really doing your research, because you dug up the one clip where I call it 6 weeks, and that's not correct. It was 5 weeks. It was from July 27th to September 1st. It was 5 weeks and 1 day. So this is the only interview where I actually called it 6 weeks. So that was weird. And I don't know what I was thinking, but you can see that from the clip you had earlier to this clip, it's like, I'm an optimist. So the way I look at it is, it's not that my hairline receded, it's that my scalp advanced, right? So, but you can also see, I do embrace it. For one thing is, I did this game. I really did the game, and I'm never going to pretend to not having done the game, and I'm proud to have done the game. I mean, to have done the game in 5 weeks, it may not be the greatest game ever, but it's a complete done game. Not everybody likes it. Not everybody even gets it, but it's a complete done game. And I'm very proud to have accomplished that and done that. But I don't tell people they're wrong if they don't like it. I really buy into players' opinions, right? Mm-hmm. Someone tells me they don't like a game, I believe that. What is interesting is sometimes people tell me, hey, you made the worst game of all time. And what I like to say to them is, oh, have you played it? And you'd be amazed how often people go, well, no, I just know it's the worst game. Oh, okay. So you don't really have an opinion of the game. Yep. You have a rumor about the game. I'd like to, but I mean, how have I dealt with that? I have embraced it. I love it, because I think humor is a very important way that we can subvert difficult emotions and really, fool ourselves into thinking more positively over disasters and things like that. But I've always framed it this way, is that E.T. shows up on worst of all time lists all over the place. And I actually prefer it when it's the worst game of all time, right? A lot of people would argue with that. A lot of people say it's not anywhere near the worst game of all time. There are far worse games, particularly on the 2600. But I prefer it when people hold it as the worst game of all time, because I also did Yars Revenge, and Yars Revenge frequently shows up as one of the best games of all time. So as long as E.T. is the worst game, I have the greatest range of any game designer in history, and I like that. So that's one way that I deal with it. Another way that I deal with it is to recognize the fact that the personal challenge of doing this game is different from the commercial success of the game, right? What it was to me and what it was for the people around us to be able to create and move this product and get it out in the time frame that we did was just a gargantuan thing to do, and it was cool. It didn't, did it help things or did it hurt things? It's really hard to say. Even if you sum up all the money aspects of what went on with this game, it did not topple $1 billion industry. It's nowhere even close. I do actually do the financial analysis in the book, right? Yep. So you can see that the amount of money that was involved and engaged in the ET project was not enough to destroy any industry or even Atari. That wasn't it. The kinds of thinking that led to the idea of trying to do a game for the most expensive movie property of all time in the least amount of time ever to do a game, the kind of thinking that thought that was a good idea, That's one of the things that really led to the crash and to the tumbling of the industry for a while. And because I saw that in the chat, somebody, Goat Dan 81, brought up a very interesting point, which was that the game itself really doesn't adapt that well anyway. It's like, when people see Raiders of the Lost Ark, you think of making a game for Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I did. I thought about it and then I did it. Raiders converts to a video game wonderfully, right? It's an action film with a real through line, and you can really understand how something like that would translate into a game. E.T. was a very, very much an emotional tone movie, right? So how do you translate that into a game? There's a few action set pieces you can focus on. Spielberg had where he wanted to go with it, and I had where I felt I could possibly go with it in the time frame we had. But really, people walk out of E.T. and they think, this is a wonderful experience. I had a beautiful emotional experience here. And then you say, hey, we got a video game for it. People go, oh, well, that's going to be a beautiful emotional experience too. I'm going to get that. Really? So what's a beautiful emotional experience in a video game like?
I know. Why can't you just make it like Pac-Man?
Yeah, really. That was Spielberg's
yes.
answer. And that was a great moment. That was an incredible moment because I almost, and I want to emphasize the word almost, went off on Spielberg when he said that. I was going to go, really? Really? You want me to do a knockoff? The most original film producer of our time wants me to do a knockoff for the game, for this. I was galling for some reason. And then, just before I opened my mouth, I really got a hold of myself and said, wait a second, hold down. I really went into that moment in the book, obviously.
I mean, that finding your composure within a few seconds from, like, not really rage, but just maybe being a little offended and just, like, the disbelief. And just, I could feel that when I read it in your book, and I felt that as far as, like, this is probably something I would feel as well, to where I'd want to lurch at him and grab him by the tie and go, are you kidding me? Something like that.
Yeah, it's shocking. And I think disbelief is really the right term for it. Yeah. It was sort of a shock and disbelief, and it was just a crazy. The thing was, I had, because when you're going to do a game in 5 weeks, it's not about, most games took 6 to 8 months. Right. Raiders took 10 months. Yars took 7. I had 2 million sellers. And each 5 weeks. You don't design a 6-month game and then try to do that in 5 weeks, because that's impossible. That is impossible. You're not going to do a 6-month game in 5 weeks. What you're going to do instead is design a game that can be done in 5 weeks. Ordinarily at Atari, what you do is you start with a concept and you work with it and you play with it. And it's like I said, it's a voyage of discovery, right? You work and you play and you experiment and you try to arrive at a fun game, and it takes as long as it takes to get to a fun game. But the goal is a fun game.
Right.
With E.T., couldn't afford that, right? So the goal can't be a fun game. I mean, the goal is not an unfun game, but
right.
What I mean is the goal is to design something that can be done in 5 weeks and try to make the best game out of that.
Right.
And it's an inversion of thinking, right? It's a different way to approach it. You're not trying to maximize the fun. You're trying to minimize the time of execution and see what you can realize with that. And that's what I did with E.T. I created a design I knew I could deliver and hoped it would have legs.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously had legs, because we're talking about it now in 2021. So, good, bad, or indifferent, it's got legs. And it's still running. That's true.
And its legs were long enough to help it walk right off a cliff in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's also true that one of the ways I really look at the video game is as a media product. And you bring up a really good point. Is that I look at it as a piece of broadcast media. I mean, back then, that's the way I thought of it. And when you think of what's the goal of a piece of broadcast media, right? To me, there's a threefold. A really great piece of broadcast media will inform, it will entertain, and it will generate social discourse, right? That's a great piece of media, in my opinion. And the fact is, how many 2,600 games are we still talking about today? I mean, on this show, more than most places.
Right.
But ET is still a topic. The video game is still a topic. And the Alamogordo dig, got international coverage. And that was what was so overwhelming for me at the dig. I did have that super emotional moment during the dig in New Mexico. And people think, oh, I was just really upset that they found the game, which was an interesting take on it, but not really what happened. What it was I was overwhelmed emotionally by the idea that this little 8K of 6502 code that I had written over 30 years before was still generating excitement and enthusiasm and creating an entertaining moment for this huge crowd of people. And the idea that I had done something to launch that, and people were still digging what was going on. I mean, both figuratively and literally in this case. It was that was very meaningful for me. That was very meaningful for me because it felt to me like I had realized my dream. Because making video games, to me, what that meant was entertaining millions of bored teenagers, which I was, and I would so desperately have wanted to have had some of the things that I was producing.
Right.
And when 10 years before, and how much I would have wanted to have something like this. I mean, with Yars Revenge, I made a game I'd want to play. That was my goal with Yars Revenge. Make a game I'd want to play because I was a fun, engaged, nerd-type, bored teenager. And I figured if I can make a game I enjoy, there's a lot of people out there who will realize it, get value from it. And that was very important to me. It meant a lot to me.
And it's definitely meant a lot to a lot of people as well. I mean, it's really affected people. You could almost say there's a great divide on ET. You have people that love it, and you have people that don't love it. And but it's still a matter of debate and a matter of opinion, and it's still being talked about. So even though it's not considered a great game, and even though it's not earth-shattering for being produced in 5 weeks, it still, like I said before, has legs. And you created something, and as the saying goes, with bad press, bad press is good press. There's no such thing as bad press. There's all that, and it's like part of your ET legacy. Your legacy is that you created something that people still talk about today, and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, you created a pop culture phenomenon in a way to where it just affects a lot of people, no matter how it is. So that is something that you definitely did, and it shows, and it shows in your passion for putting it out. Even you challenged yourself to put it out in 5 weeks. You did it, and things beyond your control helped with the collapse of the industry at the time. But I know that by reading your book, by what I get, is that you go through the array of emotions, but the challenge is always there. You always have that challenge, and you like being challenged, and you don't like to turn a challenge down. And that's definitely one of the reasons why you decided to do it. So
absolutely. I mean, but when you talk about how there's all that stuff, and I've had all this influence and all that stuff out there, the way you described it, I get chills. I mean, when you talk about that, and I think, wow, I'd really like to be that guy. That sounds really cool. And then I have to remember, oh, wait, yeah, that's me. So that was an interesting moment there. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Helping to, I've besides reading your book and watching the DVDs, I dug through a lot of things that I could find online. And I'm gonna probably skip here to a couple other things, but the one thing that I want to get to is the Wired article. So I'm going to jump to that because I think it's a good segue to going from what I just said to being exonerated for for being called the man who destroyed or toppled a billion-dollar industry. Did they reach out to you for the interview?
I was contacted by a writer for the interview.
Okay, and what was the process for the writer with the interview? Did he because usually when you get contacted, they say, "Oh, we want to do a piece on you. We want to do, usually they want to kind of tell you what kind of slant they're going with, or story background." What made you say yes to wanting to do the Wired article?
Oh, the fact that it was going to be in Wired was one of the main reasons I said yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. But I mean, they wanted to do an article about it. I mean, I have done over 100 interviews over the last 10 years, I would say, on this topic. And it's interesting. I don't mind talking about it. People think I'm very sensitive about talking about ET or things like that. And I'm not. I mean, I'm happy. I'm proud to have done it. I know what I did. I know how a lot of people reacted to it. And it's okay. I'm okay with that. I really don't have a problem with it. People dance around it or they think I'm sensitive to it.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a good angle on it. They were doing monthly segments on, people who were historic in digital production or entertainment production. And
Okay.
so I came up and I thought it was a great opportunity. And they had seen the book and read the book, and they wanted to do the piece.
Right.
And so I was all on board for it. And, we really went through it, piece by piece. It was a great article.
Did you feel at the end of the article after being interviewed and okaying it do you feel that there was any sort of weight lifted off of your shoulder? Do you feel like you've been exonerated or that you're turning a page in a new chapter? What was your feeling after it?
My feeling after that article was that, I felt they told the truth. You don't always get the feeling that the truth was told. People interview, as you're well aware, right?
Mm-hmm.
People interview you, but sometimes what they produce from the interview is not exactly what transpired in the interview.
Right.
And in this case, I think that it was a super high integrity. They did a wonderful job with it. And but the feeling of a weight lifted, that really occurred more after my first viewing of the movie Atari Game Over at the Comic-Con in San Diego.
Right.
The first time I saw it.
Yeah.
That was a piece that I felt really exonerated me. I think this piece did that also. But this carried on. I really got that, oh my God, people are getting it. And the Wired piece also did that well. I mean, it told the truth of it. Mm-hmm. And the truth of it is that, I think it was a tremendous creative effort that needed a little more time to get smoothed out, to be polished, because it's unpolished. E.T. is an unpolished game.
Right.
It's a pretty decent, and I think it's a complete production. But when I say polished, I mean that for me to feel like this is a full-blown Howard production, something that I would really feel is done. It needed a little more time. And when you think about the fact that if I had one more week, if I would have actually lived out that my misstatement in that interview and had 6 weeks, if I had one more week, think of that. That's a 20% increase in my schedule, which would be huge. And and in the book, I do that little exercise because people always ask me, what would you do? How would you change the game if you could go back and do it again? And so what I did was I broke it down into different pieces. I have the things I would do if I had one extra day, the things that I would do if I had one extra week, and the things that I would do if I had a couple of extra months. If we would have had even a 3-month schedule, which still would have been a ridiculously aggressive schedule, would have been about half of what a game had ever been done in before, but still would have been, I have different ways that I would approach changing the game for each of those categories. It's kind of an interesting exercise.
Wow. Well, that's a lot to digest with what you just said. Definitely. I mean, it's.
Well, I guess I said a mouthful then.
That you did. And with that said, I'm going to go into another clip, and this one is going to be from your DVD, and I have it as it's Once Upon Atari Part 1, and it's about a 4-minute segment, and it has a little bit of the introduction of the DVD, and then it goes into another part. So we will get to that, and we'll be back in about 4 minutes.
On January 11th, 1981, I reported for my first day of work as a game programmer at Atari, and changed my life forever. Back then, Atari was everywhere, and if you didn't have the games yourself, you probably hung out with someone who did. Atari was a truly amazing place to work, and an amazing story. So I got my friends together because we're the only ones who can tell you this story. We were there. So here it is, for the first time ever, the real story of the beginning of the industry and the phenomenon of video games. And it's called Once Upon Atari. Welcome to Once Upon Atari. I'm Howard Scott Warshaw, and I was a game engineer at Atari. We made the term video game both a household word and the top of every Christmas list. Atari games changed our culture. But the impact it had on those of us who made those games was far greater. Once Upon Atari shares these deeply personal experiences with you. In this episode, we'll explore the environment in which those games were made. It was a workplace none of us had ever imagined before, and regrettably, have never experienced since.
Atari was a really crazy place. You had to look where you were going because otherwise you might be hit by a flying lemon. People were playing bocce lemons in the hallway. There were constantly pranks going on.
The day we flew the frog.
The sprinkler lobotomy.
My first or second day there, I saw all these men coming out of the women's bathroom. I thought this was kind of odd. And I found out that there was a little lounge room that was off the main bathroom where they would all going there to get stoned. And that was Atari.
It was all sort of started by Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder, and he kind of instilled this, family-friendly feeling, parties every Friday, but you had to get your job done, otherwise you didn't hang around too long.
An environment with little discipline, but yet with clearly stated goals. And in general, that's in conflict with a corporate form. So I felt that one of the things that had to happen was that the true sources of the creative thought almost had to be disconnected a little bit from the corpus.
It wasn't run like a business in that building, and nobody really wanted it to be run like a business.
It was a real shock for people who came into Atari. Remember, I had a new boss come in named George Kish, and seemed like a pretty straight-laced guy and everything, and he comes in to manage a group of game developers, and I think the first several weeks he didn't know what hit him.
What I expected was a company. What I expected was a business. What I got was a very unique environment with a bunch of individuals who did not respond well at many times to management, did not want to respond to other management, did not wanted to just march, their own way.
Atari was the first place that I worked at where there was such strong individual contribution to the products that were being made, and that people had a lot more control and say in what they were doing.
So I basically have never had a boss. I've never had anybody tell me, Rob, do it this way, or Rob, this is what you should do.
You know, the thing that I get most out of that segment is how George Kiss, he looked like he was sweating pretty good. You must have had some pretty hot lamps on him.
I had him talking about some pretty controversial stuff during it. So I think he was relieved to be able to just say something easier in that particular moment.
Right.
That was a good interview.
And as we can see here, you autographed my copy of the book, and well, I have the DVD in the computer right now, and you autographed that for me. And that's kind of how this thing kind of got started, was that I friended you on Facebook, and after purchasing your DVD and book, and we got to talking, and I was just like, hey, would you be interested in coming on my show? And you're like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And I'm friends with Marty Goldberg, who of course is has the Atari Museum, and he has the Atari background, and produced the book and about Atari, and so, and obviously you know who Marty is, so you know you two have had your back and forths over the years. And getting back to the segment that you just watched about the basically the culture of Atari.
So the first time I was there, of course, it seemed like a perfect job.
There was this concept of passion. That if you were passionate about playing games, that was something that was extremely important to it. That as somebody who sort of looked at it as a 9-to-5 job, they tended to turn out pretty dreadful stuff.
If you have a place where you're making video games, if people are not ultra disciplined, which they're probably not because they tend to go make games for a living, there's lots of goof-off partners. And there were a lot of people that couldn't handle it.
There was always somebody running around the halls yelling, and it was, there really wasn't much structure to the place, which kind of made it good.
Yeah, it's not the case if you go work at a Hewlett-Packard or an IBM or an Intel. But Atari, there's games everywhere. And the distinction between work and play gets so blurred that if you're not really disciplined, you can just never get work done.
The lack of direction promoted initiative, you know, I mean, and it basically created a sense of work for me of commitment and responsibility.
I remember when I started, they just said, we want you to do a game in about 6 months. Here's the equipment, here's the manuals. There's people around you can ask questions. You have no set hours. We don't really want to see you till the game is almost done. So at the very beginning, it was completely free, and it was great.
Great fun. It was probably the most fun place I'd ever worked, either before then or afterwards. It was just a lot of really fun, crazy people.
Lots of times we'd have these Friday afternoon things, and that'd be it. We wouldn't come back to work.
The story I like to tell the rookies who were saying, what was your old times like? I always tell them this story. That is, every Friday, the vice president of engineering would give his keys and a company credit card to one of the engineering technicians with orders to take his car down to the liquor store and fill it with booze and ice and soft drinks and bring it back. And then announce over the intercom, Friday party's begun. So you go to the Friday party, and pretty much it was a pretty damn good party. There was always lots of booze, and it was always bought by someone who cared. So the thing I tell the rookies, though, is there were many, many times that I was at my desk working when the call went out, Friday parties going on, and I would continue working at my desk because I was doing something I really liked, and I didn't have time to party right then.
We always used to say that the Atari ethic was to work hard, play hard, because you had to play really fast, because otherwise you got no play in, because the work was very, very demanding and quite time consuming.
Despite the fact it was an intense party atmosphere, people worked hard. You came in on Saturday, you couldn't find a place to park your car. Sunday, likewise, it was very hard. And the only people that were getting paid anything to be there on the weekend were some of the engineering technicians. They were getting paid time and a half overtime to be there when they had to be there. But the people that were filling the parking lot were programmers, and they weren't getting paid anything to be there. They were doing it because they loved the job, they loved the people they were working with. So that's what Atari taught me, and I think it's a lost lesson.
That was that was part 2 there. And so is there anything that you would like to elaborate on that, with that video segment? Because I do know that it's elaborated a little bit more in your book. I mean, your book's a little bit more personal than the DVD. So, and I was also trying to figure out what was going on. So are we still having echo?
Well, let's see. How's it sounding now?
Right. So you sound good on my end.
If anybody can give us...
All right. So it now, okay. So it is gone
Echo's
now.
gone.
All right.
Okay. So I would like to go back, because I don't know if it was echoing, if I was clear about, GOG.com, you can get it to stream, and you can get autographed version from me directly at onceuponatari.com. So I hope that got through clearly. But it was an amazing kind of place to work, and the level of commitment that people had working there was remarkable, and that made it cool. It was the place that everybody wanted to be. It wasn't that we had to tell people to come in on the weekend. Nowadays, when I got back into the industry, I found a lot of times people walk around and it was almost like an office space. Well, I'm going to need you to come in this weekend.
Can you come in on Saturday too?
Yeah, you couldn't keep us away from it. I mean, I barely took any vacation. The times that I was away was usually on a business trip, either to a consumer electronics show or we're showing some games or things. I didn't really take a lot of vacations because I didn't want to be away from what I was doing. It was so compelling. This was the thing I wanted to do. Most people spend time at work waiting for a vacation to get away to go do the thing I'd like to do, and work is what you do to be able to get to do what you want to do. And I was doing what I wanted to do. I was doing what I most needed to do. And I was surrounded by people who were also like that. And we had an amazing time together. We spent a tremendous amount of time together. The people who worked at Atari probably spent a lot more time at Atari than they did at other places in their life. And that showed up in their lives. Right? There was a lot of home lives that got disturbed or interrupted or destroyed in some cases because people were so consumed by the passion for what they were doing, which was intense. I mean, when I was growing up, I can't say I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to possibly reach potentially millions of people in a way that might entertain them or do something. I did dream about stuff like that, but I never had any concept or idea of how that might happen. And I certainly never went in that direction. When I started in college, the things that I studied, the things I was doing had nothing to do with entertainment, with the singular exception of I had a minor in theater. That had a little to do with entertainment, but I never considered going into theater professionally.
Right.
And, although people did pay me to act up occasionally at Atari, so that was kind of
yeah, certain bets, right? Oh man, yeah. It's well, like I mentioned before, Atari seemed to be its own little bubble. It's it was by what I see in the DVD and what I've read in the book, it's a family and an extension of family or its own family unit, and you were able to do things that you normally wouldn't be able to do outside of Atari. And Atari almost became, it was a way of life, and it was almost a preferred way of life for many of you, including you, as far as being open about your creativity and being around other people that were creative, and that helped with getting a lot of these projects done into games and getting them out to the people. And I did read in the book that one of the things that was very pleasing was being able to go to a store and see your handiwork right there, like, hey, I made that, that's my thing right there. So
yeah, not just pleasing. That was there's also, and this is covered very well in both the book and the DVD, is that there was a lot of drugs at Atari.
Right.
I mean, there was a lot of speculation about a lot of drugs going on at Atari. And so, just to settle it and set the record straight, there absolutely was a lot of drugs going on at Atari. There's no question about it. But the ultimate high that people chased was not chemically induced. I mean, neurotransmitter induced. But the thing that really got the dopamine flowing, at Atari, was being able to go into a store and seeing your game there. Watching TV and then seeing a commercial for your game. Come on. Because at Atari, nowadays people work on games and you have teams of anywhere from 20 to 30 to several hundred people, and even up to 1,000 people now. I understand there are games now they're developed with teams that number 1,000 or more. Huge collaborative efforts go on now. At Atari, it was one programmer, one game. You did the entire game yourself. We did get to the point where we'd have some graphics help. People would do graphics for us, and we would have some sound help if we wanted it. But one person designed and programmed the entire game. And that was fabulous. It was beautiful. But it was intense, because that means that when your game succeeds, or when something goes on with your game, it's your game and it's all yours, right. And that's cool.
Yeah.
And if something sucks about a game, that is also all yours. It is all about your game. And if your game isn't working or isn't selling or isn't worth releasing, you have to own that. You have to do something about it.
Right.
And that can be frightening, because it's not like, well, it's up to the designers to come and fix this and we'll just program it up, whatever they come up with. This is, you've got to address it and deal with it. So you have to own it. You have to own it up and you have to own it down. And that's not for everybody. But for us, for the people who were doing this at Atari, that's what it was all about. And that was amazing. And it was so satisfying, so incredibly satisfying. And when it works, and you get your game out and you see a commercial for your game on television, when you go into a store, the ultimate thing at Atari was you go into a store and you would see your game is on the display. It's the display game, because they always had one game or two games running with, controllers behind the plastic, things, so people can just try the game out and play it. And if your game was on, if your game was the demo game, and then the ultimate thing was to see a couple of teenagers fighting over who gets to play it. Right? People are actually fighting to play your game. That was, I don't think any feeling quite exceeded that at Atari. That was an amazing thing. I feel so incredibly privileged to have been able to have experienced that. That was, I still feel it.
All right. Well,
it's still just an amazing thing, and I tried to communicate that in the media that I produce. But it's a hard thing to communicate, but it's a wonderful thing to feel.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to segue. I have a couple ads here that I dug up for you to take a look at, and I want to show to our viewers. So I'm going to switch on over, and afterwards I'm going to want your reaction. So I'm going to head on over and change the camera.
Fly named Yar on a quest in space. You attack the shield of the Kotile space. But watch out, Yar. He knows where you are. Yars Revenge is new on Atari. Have you played Atari today?
With ion zones and evil drones, there's nothing else like Yars Revenge, the way out space game that's new from Atari. Who else?
Have you played Atari today?
A fly. I'll have a mutant fly. Hello, Yar. You'll need some protection. Ion zone. Shift chroma. Intensify. Okay, now you'll need some weapons. You have a formidable enemy. The Kotile. Watch it, Yar. He has a lethal drone. And some other tricks up his sleeve. Spiral. Go. Good move, Yar. Now I have a surprise for you. A Zorlon cannon. Use it, Yar. Fire again. Got him. That's revenge. Yars Revenge. A video game. Yeah, this can be fun. This can be a lot of fun. Like asteroids. Get him. Do it. Beautiful. Watch it. Disintegrate. Whew. Now let's go into deeper space. Galactic map. Sector 11. Hyperspace. Sights in. Cylon warships, attack. Steady, stand by, photons. Star Raiders. That's it, Star Raiders. That'll keep them on their toes. Let's see what we can come up with next.
We're Atari. We have the vision, and we invented the technology to bring the excitement home to you.
There's some great commercials there. The first one, Yars Revenge, and it's geared towards children. What's your feelings towards Yars Revenge? Is that really, because I do notice that on the back of the box, it says special feature, and this game program contains additional versions for young children. So was that your intention to try to get Yars Revenge more towards, to get it in children's hands more?
Yeah, not exactly.
I kind of figured as such, but I wanted to ask that loaded
Yeah,
question
nah,
anyway.
you know where you're going with this, and I love that. That was a great introduction to it, because it's funny. Because one of the great things about Yars Revenge came to be the most tested game in Atari history. They just kept putting it through test after test after test. And the thing was, because there was somebody at Atari who was trying to hold it back or modify it, they really had some concern about the game that nobody else seemed to have. And I wanted to, because Yars was my first game, and I really wanted to release it. I had a condition that I came to call releasus interruptus, where I was just ready to go, because you want to get your first game out. This is my first game, and I want to put a game out. I want to be a person who has a game on the shelf. I want to be a designer who has produced. That's what you want to do. And I finished the game, and people were excited about the game. People loved the game. People in VCS loved the game. People in coin-op loved the game. And people in coin-op did not love a lot of VCS games, but they loved this game. Everybody loved this game, and they tested it, and the people they tested it with loved the game, and it was great. And then, okay, so here we go. We're going to put it out. I'm ready. I am ready to go. And suddenly, oh, wait, there's a problem with the game. Well, what's the problem with the game? Oh, we need another test because there's a problem with the game. So they ran another test, and it went really well. It's like, okay, here we go. And it just kept going that way. And so they finally did this huge play test. I mean, I really go elaborately into the whole thing, but long story short, they did an ultimate test with the game, and the game broke all the records for the testing. And the demographic that it did the best with was adult women. And Atari had been screaming for games for women. I mean, I talk a lot about women in video games in the book, and there's a whole section on trying to adapt games for women and the women who were making games and what that was like, because it was a very interesting story. The conflict between the people, the women who were actually there making games, and the people who were trying to get women involved in games and get us to make games that would appeal to women. You would think there was some crossover there, but not so much. So it was a weird kind of funny and insulting and horrific kind of a situation. And then here's this game that tests really well with adult women. And so I went to marketing. I go, okay, so you've been looking for a game for adult women. Here's a game for adult women. How about it? And they go, oh, women don't like space shooters. What? What do you mean they don't like space shooters? They like this game. Your own testing says they like this. Oh, no, women don't like space shooters. So who are you going to market this to? Well, we're going to shoot it at 10, 11-year-old boys. And I'm like, what? It's like, why would you do that? This is a game that has a lot of adult appeal. So why don't you? Oh no, that doesn't work. And this was the basis. This was a small microcosm of the big picture, which was huge conflict between engineering and marketing, because there was very little love lost and very little respect for each other between engineering and marketing. And this was like a prime example of it. And so you look at this commercial, and I have to say, at least they had the mother playing, or they had the woman playing and kind of enjoying it. But you look at the commercials for Yars Revenge, and they're mostly about very young kids. I mean, even young by video game standards.
Right, yes.
Because this was their sense. This is what they like, that this is for young kids. And it's like, somehow it still found its audience. It found its audience, which was an older demographic than a lot of the other games. But it wasn't, that wasn't the way they positioned it. That wasn't the way they advertised it. And I was a little bugged when I first saw the commercial for Yars. I mean, I did have the thing of like, oh my God, there's my game. And that was really exciting to see those commercials at first. But, after you see the commercial a couple of times, you start to actually watch the commercial. Which the first time you see a commercial for your game, you don't watch the commercial. You go, oh my God, this is my game. There's a commercial for my game on. Everybody, are you seeing this? It's like, that's what happens the first time. But then you get to watch the commercial, you think, wait a second, why are you positioning it that way? It just seemed odd. And then I really love the commercial where they show the guy, well, hello, Yars.
Yeah.
But the way they conceptualized game development and the way it's going was so absurd and so amusing in some ways. Because the great thing about Yars Revenge is all the visuals and all the animations and absolutely everything in Yars Revenge was done, solidified, and in place before any of them had a name. So, and the whole idea of theming, the Yars Revenge theming is another major thing. One of the things about Yars Revenge was it's a game of firsts. There was a lot of industry-defining firsts that were done in Yars Revenge. And one of them was having a backstory.
Yes.
The backstory didn't occur till the end of the game. It was nowhere near the beginning of the game. My original work time freeze. And although the animation for the Yard that you see was the first animation that I put in for that character in the game, I just thought of it as I didn't think of it as a fly or anything like that. I just thought this is a cool animation because it has moving parts and it works at all the different angles, right? Because you have to have an animation that works if it's going to move in these directions. You have to have all the different directions. So that's what I liked about it, was that it worked, it flowed, it didn't take too many bites, and I could play it, I could mirror it, right, which saves half the graphics.
Right.
And so those were the advantages of it. But the naming and the storyline, that all came later. I actually wrote an old backstory for it. It turned out to be the first backstory for a video game, and also turned out to be the first ancillary product when they made the comic book that went out with Yars Revenge.
Right, and I have that comic book up on the screen right now, and Of course, it has the iconic airbrushed artwork on the front cover, and it goes into the very nice artwork that's on the inside. Now, this was more of a marketing thing. You did not have anything to do with the writing of this comic, correct?
No, I wrote the backstory, turned that over to marketing, and this was another example. I wrote an 8 or 9 page sci-fi story about how the first interstellar starships, some flies got on them and they evolved, they wiped out the human beings, and they populated the solar system, and then the Kotile monsters come and attack them, and that's the whole theme of Yars Revenge. I wanted to motivate the story, to get so you know what you're doing and what you're playing in the game. And they rewrote it into like this weird kind of comic book thing that was aimed at kids. I mean, really young kids. And that was another thing. I said, why do you keep pulling this down? But this is what they did. And it was a nicely produced comic. And the art, the guy named Hiro was the guy who made the name of the guy who did the actual box art and the cover of the comic book. Great image. Just a wonderful image. The people who were working on this stuff were really good at what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
All the artistic production and the technical production, that stuff was pretty slick. And then it was just, some of the choices seemed odd to me, but, that was their thing. And they did the packaging and putting it out. But I played a few little marketing tricks. I go into some of that in the book too, obviously, about how I kind of outmaneuvered marketing to position the game the way I wanted to position, or at least to get the name and the story and all of that stuff in place. But I couldn't control where they went with it, but that was fine, including the credit. One of the things that's interesting about Yars Revenge, at least I find it, is that Yars Revenge was the first Atari game that had the programmer credited.
Right.
In the product. That had never happened before. And Atari was way against that. They would never want to credit programmers. I mean, Activision and other companies, they made a whole thing about it. It was very important to them to credit programmers when they could. But Atari never wanted to do that. They wanted it to be an Atari product, not the product of any individual.
Right.
And so, but I created a situation that they really couldn't do anything about because I had written the backstory. And so they made the comic book, and when they made the comic book, they put credits in the back of the comic book. And one of the credits they had to have at that point was to game programmer. And so I got the credit, obviously, for game programmer. And then I actually went, and they had somebody else credited with the story. And I went to them and I said, but wait a minute, I wrote the story. I said, why aren't I credited with the story? And they said to me, you can have one credit. Would you like to be the game programmer, or would you like to be the person who wrote the story? And I said, game programmer, thank you. And that was the end of that. And it was, but somebody else did write this story. I would have wanted them to say original story by, and then comic book story by, or something. But you can only carry this so far.
David Pizon in the chat did ask, and this is relevant to what we're talking about, do you still have the Yars backstory treatment?
This is a sad story. See, one of the things that's weird about me, one of the many things that is weird about me is that I am very, very forward focused. I do leave stuff around. Like, I don't throw stuff away. My wife makes fun of me because I don't throw stuff away. But I don't hold on to stuff. I don't keep stuff. What I do is I just sort of dump it, and it just sits around, and I ignore it. And then every once in a while, I purge. I just throw a bunch of stuff away because I don't need it. Like if I move or something's going on, or if I need some room for something else, I just clear stuff out and I don't think about it. So there wasn't a lot of Atari stuff that I saved. But I have a really good friend, the person who did the graphics for Raiders and for E.T. and for Saboteur, my last game, Jerome Demura, is a very good friend of mine. We became very good friends at Atari, and we were friends ever since. We were friends for over 35 years, very close friends. And he was an amazing archivist. He saved everything and categorized it, and he was like a librarian at heart. but he was a graphics animation designer and an interface designer, and a good one. And so he had it, and at one point we were going through stuff when I was researching stuff for the DVD and again for the book and for some of the movies for Atari Game Over. We went through and we were scanning stuff and doing it, and we came across the treatment for Yars. He had a copy. I didn't have a copy, but he had a copy of the original story that I had written for Yars Revenge. So as long as he had it, I knew where it was, and that was good. And so I didn't scan it that day. We scanned a whole bunch of stuff that day. I didn't scan that. And I figured there it is. And then a couple years later, about 4 years ago now, wow. So 4 years ago, he died. So Jerome, my good friend, is dead. And I actually have his ashes right here. I have his, because I'm the one who picked up his ashes from the crematorium, because he was not really prepared for dying, and I don't think he wanted to be. So he just got cremated by the county, and I was the one who went to pick up his ashes because none of his relatives really lived in this area at all. And I was kind of honored to do that, and I've been the keeper of his ashes. And I will tell you honestly that I occasionally go and spread these ashes around in various places I know he would like to be. And so, you'll find some of Jerome here, and you will find some of Jerome there. You never know where you're going to run into Jerome. But
that sounds like a game.
And when he died, I had access to his archives and stuff, but he had a very complex naming system. I didn't have the password to his index file. So I looked through a bunch of stuff. I actually looked for that. I wanted to reclaim that, but I couldn't find it. You know who has it, though, is the Video Game History Museum in outside of Dallas.
Yes. Okay.
In Texas. The one run by John Hardy and those guys. They have it. So somewhere, I think they took a lot of the records and stuff from Jerome. So if they got the right boxes, and if they've gone through it all enough yet, they may have the actual original Yars Revenge story, which is not called Yars Revenge. It's called The Yarian Revenge of Razak IV. That's the actual original title of the story.
Wow.
And so I'm hoping, if John's listening, I hope that he will, if he comes across that, he will at least send me a copy, because I'd like to read it again. I've done a lot of writing since then, and I'd be interested to know what I think of what I wrote back then. I have a feeling I would want to edit it now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could even go towards maybe a sequel, an official sequel from you. Wouldn't that be something? You could work it in.
Well, I have a sequel.
Right.
I mean, I have a design for Yars Revenge, which is technically a prequel.
Okay.
It's sort of a simulquel, actually.
Okay. Which is people are doing nowadays.
Because the theme of it was, my original working title for it was Yarian Olympics. Because what this was going to be a sporting game. I thought of this stuff back at Atari. There was going to be this Olympic competition that Yars go through that actually trains them to fight Kotiles. And that was one of the bases of the whole Yars legacy. Okay. But I never did that game. I had a design for it, and I never did it for a variety of reasons. I just never did that design. But I think it's a really fun party-based action game, a multiplayer game that I think would still, I've never seen it done. I've never seen the gameplay done. And I still think, even though I don't have the rights to Yars Revenge, I think I may end up doing it with a homebrew. I may get a homebrew guy or get someone and produce this game together and put this out, because I think it would be a really fun game for people to play. And, I don't know what I'll call it yet, but it might be HSW's Revenge. I think that would be a fun title.
There you go. Maybe you have a fight with the marketers or something like that,
Marketing. There was an adventure game there was a text adventure game that someone had written at Atari that I think was called Marketing Adventure.
Oh.
And it would involve going around and trying to find the golden disc, the magic disc that had the software on it for the great game that you're going to sell. And it was this wacky walking around the Atari campus, and somebody had realized the Atari campus in a text adventure and just made this goofy adventure game. If you remember Zork, if you're old enough or enough of a classic fan to remember Zork, this was a Zork style adventure production. It was very cool. And that was another, there was a number of side projects that got done at Atari that weren't really official game stuff, but were a huge part of the lore and really reflexive of the culture and the attitude that made Atari successful. And it was, what an amazing place. Just such a cool place. There'll never be another Atari.
You know, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the last segment that we're going to do with your DVD, Once Upon Atari, we're digging in and talking about Nolan Bushnell. And it's on managing the creative workplace. So why don't we go into that and watch that video.
I'm starting to believe that truly great things can come out of very few numbers of people if the methodology is left flexible and the goals are clearly stated, and almost the rest of it doesn't matter. You know, let them choose. You know, they don't have to fit my mold. They just have to accomplish what the corporation has said they need, that, you know, within broad brushes, what the corporation needs for its business model. All the really big dollar items always came from parts of the company that had nothing to do with the ongoing product. I mean, they were sort of what I call F troops. And I've always believed in these F troops, places where you could let them bring their dogs to work and give them you know, and give their dogs a badge. And let them have a refrigerator with beer in it, you know, which you can't do in the general corporation, but you can generally give certain freedoms to the creative sides, and that's sort of the milk, the mother's milk of the creative process. If you can do that, you can keep the truly creative. Another thing is that some of the creative people abide fools very poorly. And so what a lot of times you have to do is almost create a bubble for them to be in. Otherwise, they're just in the face of the other managers, and the managers want to throw them out the window. And so you kind of have to create these buffer zones for the truly creative. And sometimes some real creative people have exceeded my threshold, and I've had to throw them out the window. You know, I mean, because because after a time, sometimes the real prima donnas are just too much to bear, and you say, no amount of creative thought is worth this. But my threshold is much further than what I'd call the typical Wall Street type. Cadillac Chevy conundrum. In which an incompetent marketer never believes that they know how to sell anything, and so they want to cheat. And so they will define a product that has all the features of a Cadillac and price it like a Chevy and say, I can sell that. And so then the engineer goes through this process of designing a Cadillac, but when the quotes come back from manufacturing, it is priced like a Cadillac. Well, the marketer goes, oh my God, I can't compete with Cadillac prices in the Cadillac market. I can only compete, because I'm an idiot, I can only compete with a Cadillac in the Chevy market, priced like a Chevy. And so then the engineer has to come in and de-feature his product for cost reasons. And slowly but surely, he's got a Chevy, and it's at the Chevy prices. And the marketer says, oh my God, what are we going to do? And so what happens in that case is there is a lack of sensitivity on the part of management to the real world. I think of myself as an economic editor a little bit, or a business engineer, in which I take concepts, people, and capital, and I mash them together and create something. So I can't say that I was the father of the video game if you're talking about playing a game on a CRT. I wasn't. That wasn't me. that was Russell and some of the guys at MIT early on. I played their games when I was in college, so I stand on their shoulders. What I did is I made the thing economic. I published in an economic fashion new games, yes, creative games, yes, but in an economic structure that worked, that made sense. And so, in some ways, the thing that I did was an economic thing, more than a real creative thing, though there was a lot of creative thought going into a lot of those issues.
All right, so we kind of have done, actually we're going back a couple steps here because I had talked about the bubble before, and Nolan Bushnell actually talked about the bubble, and that bubble is the, you could say, the barriers in which everybody worked in. So here you're allowed to have beer at work, bring your dog to work, be the kind of people you want to be, as long as you're making the product and it gets out within a certain amount of time. But you have all this freedom, and I think that looking into, and I'm getting into the next segment here by talking about Bushnell and the bubble, and the bubble I had mentioned before, you are now, and have been for a while, and you can let me know, you're a psychotherapist, and basically, when did you decide to become a therapist, and why? You went from the Atari bubble and working in that type of environment, and you've had your journeys through being a videographer or getting into the video field, and then you became a psychotherapist. So,
well, I worked everywhere. I mean, I worked all over the computer industry. I was a photographer, a videographer, a documentary filmmaker. I've written several books, many columns, speaking, teaching, all of these things. I was a real estate broker. I had a California real estate broker's license for a while. I like to learn new things. I like to incorporate new skill sets. I like to do that. But Atari showed me something that was amazing. And that was that it's possible to have a work experience where someone who is as right brain, left brain balanced as I am, and yet imbalanced, right, can still have a job that really draws on both sides, right? To have a job that really demands both sides. And after Atari, it was really hard for me to find that. I could find things that were more art heavy. I could find things that were more tech heavy, but it was really hard for me to find things that demanded both, that really required both. And I go completely elaborately into exactly how and when and where I decided to shift and become a therapist and go through it. And in fact, let's see, I happen to have here the last book that I wrote, The Inspired Therapist, right? Inspired Therapist by me. So that's the story of becoming a therapist, what I went through as a trainee, as an intern, and ultimately as a licensed therapist in private practice. And what I learned, what inspired me, what kept me going. And it's an interesting story if you like therapy type stuff. But the thing about being a therapist, being a psychotherapist, really is an amazing mixture and balance of both art and technique. It's both. It requires both. You've got to have both. And it's challenging in that way. The other thing that's really appealing about becoming a psychotherapist for me is that it takes I have a very wide, broad, and esoteric background, but every single thing I've ever done comes into play as a therapist, because you never know who's going to walk in next. But the thing is, with most people who I work with, when they come into the office, there's some part of their background, there's some aspect of what they're doing and some aspect of the issues and the problems that they're having that I have background with, I have experience with, I know what's going on, I understand what they're dealing with. So whether it's creative production, whether it's dealing with technology, whether it's dealing with tight schedules, whether it's dealing with creative constipation or trying to reach into your brain and pull that out, whether it's anxiety or depression or any of these things, I have experienced all of this stuff. And so that whole background comes together. And I'm able to use everything that I have in the service of actually helping other people. So, I mean, I work with all kinds of people, but my primary audience as a psychotherapist is high-tech leaders and the super intelligent. I like to work with people who are just really smart, because you don't have to be as smart as them to help them. You just have to be smart enough.
And, you know, that was my next question. Are your clients mostly from the tech industry?
A lot of them are from the tech industry, but they're not exclusively from the tech industry. I work with all kinds of people. I really do.
Okay.
I've worked with people as young as 14 or 15 years old, as old as 84, 85. I work with tech people. I work with couples. I work a lot with couples because I do couples therapy and I work with individuals. I work with couples where one of them is in tech and the other is not in tech, and they're having trouble communicating. And I'm very good at helping those couples reconnect and get together because I'm bilingual, right? I speak both English and nerd. And so I can actually help them understand each other in a way that sometimes they're having trouble doing.
So,
and in point of fact, I just have to say that one of the coolest things about my book, I was going to show you this. Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. I actually had a couple contact me and say that this book actually helped their marriage. You would think the other book was the one that helped their marriage. But it turns out that this book helped their marriage because one of the things I really go into in this book is an analysis of nerd culture and what geeks are about and what programmers are like and what technology is, but it's geared towards non-technological people. And this enabled this couple where there was a nerd married to a total non-nerd and enabled them to really see each other in a much more sympathetic way and to understand some of the things that they saw going on but didn't quite make sense. And it actually helped their relationship. So I did not write this book with the intention of it being therapeutically applicable. And to find out that it was just sort of tickled me. I just thought that was really cool. That's what you call unearned increment. And I'm very happy to take
Well, you got that from E.T. as well. You know, it became something legendary and people still talk about today. So you can put both your book and your game E.T. together as something that has helped people and make people talk and debate and communicate. And, you know, that's part of being a psychotherapist, is helping people learn to communicate in better ways with other people and with themselves. So I think both your book and E.T. and Yars Revenge do all those things. It helps with communication.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, well, communication is literally my life right now and my job. So I love that. But and speaking of communicating, if people want to communicate with me, you know, you can find me at hswarshaw.com for my therapy website. Or if you're interested in the book or the DVD, the book you can find on Amazon, and you can find the ebook at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Tolino. There's all kinds of places and outlets where you can find the ebook or the book. But if you want an autographed copy of the book or the DVD, go to onceUponAtari.com, and you can deal with me directly, and I can get you autographed copies of either or both.
Next question about being a psychotherapist is, what are the biggest challenges you face with your clients? Is there a certain issues that affect people in tech more than people that are not in tech? I know that's kind of a weird question. It's like, do you see more issues coming from people that are in tech, I guess?
Well, everybody's got issues. Right. There's no shortage of issues, right? So it's not like, I mean, the issues that people in tech have are Sometimes they're similar, sometimes they're different. I mean, most people experience anxiety the same way. What they have anxiety about varies a lot from person to person. There isn't really like tech problems versus non-tech problems. There are people with tight schedules in and out of tech. There are people who deal with stress, either better or worse, in and out of tech. There are tech people who have trouble understanding their non-tech partners, and there are plenty of non-tech partners who have trouble understanding their tech partners. And why they do what they do, and why don't they just do it this way, because it would be so much easier. I mean, when it comes to working with couples, what I like to say is that every couple comes to therapy knowing exactly how their partner needs to change to make things better. And they expect me to team up with them to fix their partner to make things okay. But, the truth of it is we're all contributing to the issues and the problems that we're having. And what I do is I don't fix people and I don't fix problems. What I do as a therapist is I help people break out of the limited perspective. Because usually when we have problems, it's because we're not seeing enough possible answers. When we can see more answers, it's usually easier to pick which way we want to go and what we want to do. But if the best answers aren't available to us because we just don't see them, what I do is I try to expand people's vision. I help them become more aware and recognize more possibilities than they're thinking of currently. And as that happens, then they're free to make the decisions they want to do. I just help people get to the place where they make the decision they need to make that they can be happy with. Because when people get in trouble is when they don't see any solution to an issue that they can be happy with. So if all I have is horrible alternatives and I have a problem that really needs to be solved, that's a tough place to be.
Right.
Then it's a lesser of evils kind of thing. And I try to help people get out of that corner that they may have painted themselves into and, paint themselves into a much nicer place.
How does your game design background help your clients today?
I think my game design background helps because it stimulates my creative components. Because as a therapist, you need to be creative. You need to understand what someone is saying. You need to understand the difference between what they're saying and what they mean. And then you need a creative way to reflect it back to them so they can actually get past what they're saying down to their meaning. Because when most people recognize at a deep level what they're really trying to say or do, it's much easier to accomplish that. But you'd be amazed how easy it is to get out of touch with that. So the creative aspect was very much helped by my game development stuff. As a technology and systems engineer, though, that's part and parcel of what therapy is. Because a lot of people think it's a very odd transition to go from being a programmer to being a psychotherapist. A lot of people see those as contradictory fields. And I don't. I see them actually as the same sort of thing. If you think about it, therapists and programmers, we're all systems analysts, right? It's just that what I did was I moved on to a much more sophisticated hardware in the human brain. But I'm also turning into a pumpkin.
All right, well, I have one more question for you. What's your suggestion for anyone going through some tough times right now?
See a therapist.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people are having trouble with the pandemic and with being shut in and be working through Zoom all the time. People are more tired than they used to be. I wrote an article on LinkedIn called Quarantine Lifestyle. And it's unanticipated consequences of what went on. People aren't really, it's an odd place to be. How many of us have said, in years past, oh, if I could just have a few days at home, if I could just have some more time at home, I could get so much stuff done. I never get a chance to do it. Now you have so many people who have so much time at home and can't seem to get much done. And it's very frustrating. There are some people for whom this works great. There's two kinds of people in the pandemic. There's the pandemophiles and the pandemophobes. The pandemophiles are loving it and have a big problem with the idea that things might open back up, and now they're going to have to go back to dealing with things the way they were. Then you have the pandemophobes who hate the way it's been going this has been a grueling, horrible mess. And now things are going to open up, but how are they going to open up? And what are we going to do? And what's it going to look like? And how am I going to deal with that now? And oh my God. And then you have people who are fine with the way it's been and fine with the way it's going to be, and they're doing fine. And I don't see those people very often.
Right.
I see the people who have the issue. And but one thing I could tell your listeners right now that may be helpful is a lot of people are struggling with the idea that I'm doing a lot of the same stuff I always used to do, but I'm more tired, I'm more drained. It's taking more out of me. And the truth is, we are doing the same things we used to do, but we're not doing them exactly the same way. We're doing them with more worry, with more anxiety, with more concern than we used to. We're also doing them in more tightly focused ways. Having a conversation with someone actually face-to-face in a room is very different than having a Zoom conversation.
Yes.
In a Zoom conversation, I'm focused on a very small square on one screen, and I feel obligated to stay with that the whole time. When I'm just talking to someone in a room, my attention varies. It moves around. It travels. And I'm looking at the whole person, and I can see all their body language. I see everything that's going on. We're trying to get the same amount of information that we used to from a much smaller window of it. And we're also forced to look in one place the whole time, which, believe it or not, is much more stressful than being able to look around and have a whole, full interactive experience. So having a conversation, that's never used to be that taxing for me. I don't see why it's so troubling right now. The reasons, and I have some good metaphors for it and stuff, but it's basically like, think of the cell phone. Like when you get out of contact and you can't find a signal, you know how quickly your battery drains on the cell phone? Because it's trying to find the signal that it can't connect, and it actually boosts its power output to try and get a hold of a signal somewhere, but it can't find it. And in a sense, what's been happening to people during the pandemic is we're all like cell phones. We lost our signal. We lost our signal, which was the way we used to live. And now we're trying to figure out how to live in a different way. And we're not quite sure how to do it. And so we're trying to find that signal again. As a result, we've boosted our power output, and we still do a lot of the same things we used to do. We don't realize that we're spending a lot more energy doing it. Anxiety is not free. It costs energy.
Right.
And as we increase our anxiety production, we decrease our overall energy. And if we know that, it's not so bad. You go, well, I'm a little tired, but I realize, this is more draining than it used to be. But for people who really think it is the same thing, and it should be the same, and it should feel the same, they're feeling more tired, and they don't understand why, and they start to wonder if there's something wrong with them. And that kind of thinking can create problems for some people. So it's probably not you. It's probably the situation. But if you're really concerned, come see a therapist, and they'll help you figure out if it's the situation, or in some cases, it is you. So it'd be nice to know that.
Right,
too.
right. It's always nice to know, reflect upon yourself and see how you can better yourself and hopefully the people around you as well. So, because it's all an energy thing. At least that's what I believe in. Some people can feel it, some don't. But, if you walk into a room and, things go away that you didn't want to, well, maybe, it's a little bit of negative energy you got, and you gotta kind of reset yourself, so to speak, like with your cell phone analogy. It's just, gotta find that signal again, get, and get back to it. So, do you have time for a couple questions?
I just have a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I'm really kind of over time here, so I'm going to need to cut out soon.
Okay,
But
I will ask you just a couple quick questions here. We're going to be, of course, going back to your Atari days. And Luke asked, with the particular amount of scrutiny that crunch periods in game development have been coming under in the wake of Telltale Games' closure and refusal to give its employees severance pay, what do you think you can contribute to the discussion, considering that you were undeniably made to do that with ET, with the crunch time?
Well, I wasn't made to do that with ET. I totally volunteered to do that with ET. I was out of the industry for a while. When I came back, one of the major differences that went on in the industry was that the kind of things we used to volunteer to do, people were now being demanded to do. And that's a very different situation. And I think it's the truth that video game development is brutal. And it takes a lot, and there's a lot of management that is very ready to demand more of that and say, look, this is what it is. And the other thing is that increasingly the model of grab a group, make a game, and disband the group goes. And when they disband the group, that can be pretty ugly. Mm-hmm. And people are gathered and spread and scattered and gathered and scattered and gathered and scattered. And it's not an easy lifestyle. Okay. There have been attempts to unionize. You know, at Electronic Arts, there was a whole big thing that went on for a while about, you know, people are paid based on 40-hour weeks, and then they're demanded to work 60 to 80-hour weeks. And, you know, you can do that for a while, but when you try to make that a lifestyle, you get some real conflict. And like I said, when people are operating purely from passion, that's a very different way to approach what's going on. When people are operating out of obligation, you're not going to find the same motivation. And so you're going to have more blowback, and there's going to be more fallout. And I think that's going to continue. You know, what could I contribute to that discussion? Well, if anybody invited me into the discussion, I'm skilled as a mediator, and I know both sides of the piece, and I would love to be able to go and mediate some discussions between production and management about how to better organize and work, create realistic work schedules. Because when people are working that long, they're not necessarily more productive. They're just there longer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's less productive because they're much more irritated, and they're not as creative. They're not as clear-minded. Mm-hmm. And so what you do is you create more problems instead of solutions. And then, you know, the problem with bugs is that it doesn't just cost you the time it took to put it in. It also costs you the time to take it out. If you don't put the bug in the first place, you're saving a lot. Right. And I think a lot of bugs and problems are created because people are overtired working on something they're not as passionate about as they are feeling obligated about. And that's an environment that creates a lot of problems. And you have to undo them before you can release. And nobody wants to pay for that. It's it's not pretty.
Right. I completely agree with you. And the last question of the evening from Joe: how often did the hardware limit your designs? Along with that, can you think of any game features you couldn't do specifically because you couldn't make the hardware do it?
Well, let me preface this by saying that it is a poor craftsman who blames their tools. Okay? So, but you know, I don't think there shouldn't be a 2600 game that is not limited by the hardware. Mm-hmm. Okay, because if you're really trying to push and do something and create something, there's always a limitation. There's always you would like more and be able to do more. I can think of one real counterexample, and that is Tetris. Tetris is an amazing example of beautiful game design that is absolutely not limited in any way by hardware on virtually any video game system anywhere. So either you have genius game design where the game itself is so elegant that it provides a tremendous amount of game experience without taxing the hardware very much. Or what happens much more frequently is we're trying to add more elements to enhance the viability or the playability of the game. And when you're trying to add more elements, that's where you run into hardware limitations. What do people want the most on the 2600? I would say at least one more game sprite. You know, it's like having only 2 game sprites. I mean, on the 2600, you have 2 players, which means 8 bits that you can display on a line in one color. Then it has 2 missiles, which are 1 bit of a color that matches the player's color. And then it has a ball, which is 1 more missile, essentially. That's the color of the background. And it also has background stuff. It has the background registers, which you can fill in. That's all you've got. And the background stuff is very low resolution. So you really don't have much. So you do things like trying to design things that are separated vertically. Vertical separation is a huge thing on the 2600 because you can reuse a player. Once you display a graphic, you can now reposition and reuse that somewhere else. You just can't do it on the same line. And that's what's really tough about the 2600. So I would say the first thing anybody on the 2600 would ask for would be at least one more player sprite, to work with. So now you could have 3 things on a line instead of 2. And that would enhance the capacity to put things on the screen enormously, or at least by 50%, depending on how you look at it.
Well, Howard, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and sharing your background about working at Atari and going through all the wonderful and not so wonderful things and really being part of a really video game history, good and not so good. And it all ended up working out in the end anyways, because we're still talking about it after all these years. And if you could, please show your book again. I have your DVD right here. And where can we get the book and DVD?
Okay, the book, both paperback and ebook, can be found, like I said, on Barnes & Noble, on Amazon.com, and a lot of different outlets all over the place. The DVD is available on Amazon from a couple of outlets, or you can go to onceuponatari.com and you can deal directly with me. And if you really want an autograph, if you're willing to pay a little higher price and you would like an autographed copy, I will personally autograph a book and or a DVD for you and send them directly to you. So
all right,
onceuponatari.com, Amazon.com, they're all available. And Jason, this was really a pleasure talking with you. Great questions. It was really fun to see some of those old clips. And I just really enjoyed talking with you. This was very cool. I'm sorry I don't have more time, but I don't know that we need to go 3 or 4 hours this time. But
hey,
I'd be happy to talk to you again.
Oh, hey, that would be great. I'm so honored, and I'm very happy to hear that. And hopefully we can work on getting you to the Midwest Gaming Classic show to where you can do a panel. We'd love to have you there. So hopefully we can figure something out with you.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
Okay, so thank you very much, Howard. Thank you for being on, and we hope to see you soon, either back on the show here or at the Midwest Gaming Classic.
Jason, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for showing up. Thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate it. You taking your time out of your day or your evening, wherever you are, your morning, whatever, to watch me, to watch Howard, and to learn a little bit more about Atari and the Once Upon Atari DVD and his book, Once Upon Atari. And I almost hit myself with it. Until next week, thank you for watching. Take care, stay safe, and game on. And there you go. That is the Howard Scott Warshaw interview that I did a couple years ago. And I wanted to share with you that interview because to me, it was a very special interview. It went on for a couple hours and it really shown a different side of Howard Scott Warshaw that a lot of people didn't know about, and that was being a psychotherapist. And it really gave a lot of he gave a lot of advice to the viewers at the time, and hopefully again with the re-upload of that interview. Now, speaking of interviews going forward, a lot of them are going to be the panels that I have filmed at past Midwest Gaming Classics. That would be from 2015 all the way up to 2022. Unfortunately, there will be no 2023 panels because I took that year off, or this year, which is almost over. There's only a few days left. So I will be returning as a panel director, though, in 2024, and I will be filming the panels. So if you missed the panels at the Midwest Gaming Classic because of everything that's going on there, all the things that are going on, I will be uploading them to Twitch, and then I will also be uploading them to the Midwest Gaming Classic YouTube channel. And it looks like the podcast will be on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts as well. So with that said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching over the past and listening over the past couple hours to the Howard Scott Warshaw interview. And, you know, I just said it a couple years ago, but you know what? I'm going to say it again. Thank you very much for watching. It's greatly appreciated. Take care, stay safe, and game on.
When you decide to come out to this type of function, this type of experience, this type of gathering, Marvel phenomenon, there is only one event to attend, the Midwest Gaming Classic, where you and the games are one. Midwest Gaming Classic. It's not just child's play.